Alright everyone, in this video I want to talk about risks and complications associated with the MSE appliance, the maxillary skeletal expander. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, link in the description below. Basically, it's an orthodontic appliance that splits your maxilla in half and expands you by anchoring into the bone rather than pushing on the teeth, which is very different than most expanders, which just push on the teeth, and as a result can only give you very minimal expansion, and when they do, they put the teeth at risk. So the MSE is a bone-borne orthodontic expansion appliance that gives you transverse expansion. I've touted this appliance and a lot of its benefits, and in this video I want to talk about a lot of the risk complications associated with it, and they definitely exist. This appliance is not all Skittles and rainbows. One of the big things I've talked about in the past is the pain and headaches and also the ugliness to your teeth that are associated with this appliance, and I'll get into that a little bit in the video, but I want to talk about some of the stuff I haven't really gotten too deep into. And I want to start, so let me give you a quick list of what all those complications and risks are, and then I want to jump into them one by one. Pain, headaches, ugliness to the teeth, the MSE not splitting the suture. Associated with that are screw drag, which means the screws drag through the bone rather than anchoring into the bone and splitting the bone. A resulting complication, which is if your MSE appliance has arms on it, those arms can either push into the teeth or they can, if they're plastic wings, they push into the skin of the maxilla, and that irritates the hell out of your skin and causes an infection possibly. And if you have arms that are going into the teeth and the teeth take the brunt of the force rather than the skin, then that can cause flaring of your teeth if it's not caught quickly. Next up, warping of the appliance. This is pretty minor, but this happened with me. And then your orthodontist has to fix the warping. And then next, we have the two big ones, and I want to talk about these first. So I'm just going to get right into them, and they are unilateral expansion, which means one side expands more than the other, as well as asymmetric expansion, which is that, one side expands more than the other, but also one side can expand forward while the other side doesn't expand as forward, and that's because the appliance either is installed at an angle diagonally, which results in a diagonal split, or the appliance is eventually becomes diagonal because of the chaos of the splitting process. When it is very chaotic, there's a lot of force being applied and reapplied between the MSE and the bone, so shit happens for sure. All right, let me start with unilateral expansion because I think this is the most interesting complication and it's something that I've experienced. Unilateral expansion and asymmetry. So the MSE is meant to split your maxilla in two, and it applies an equal force between both sides, right? So ideally you get a perfectly even split. However, our skulls are not perfectly even in and of themselves. In my case, something like my right side was either had more stubborn bone, or for whatever reason my right side did not expand as much as my left side. I had about 10 millimeters of total expansion with the MSE, and I think about 7 went into the left side, and about only 3 went into the right side. And furthermore, the left side expanded a little bit more forward than the right side as part of this asymmetry. Now, why does this happen? I don't really know, but I suspect two things. I suspect that the bone on the right side was much more stubborn than the bone on the left side, so that when the MSE applied force into my maxilla, the right side was like a brick wall, and then the left side just pushed off of it. So the right side did expand some, but the left side expanded more. My tip to you would be to keep an eye on this. Keep an eye on this when you're expanding. Make sure you know where your center is and expand slowly. Instead of expanding rapidly the way I did, multiple turns per day, expand no more than 1 turn per day. This is the Richard Ting protocol. This will allow you to keep an eye on potential unilateral expansion and to nip it in the bud if you start seeing it happening. Because if you start seeing that the expansion is more unilateral, rather than end up with a complicated orthodontic situation like I have, in which I'm now having to use the MSE to torque in the upper left teeth, which got expanded more. I'm using elastics anchored to the MSE, going up to the upper left teeth to pull those upper left teeth so that they tilt in to help accommodate the bite in that area, because the expansion was asymmetric. Now, another reason why I think that it was just that my right side was more stubborn was that I've always had a crossbite on my right side but not my left. So this makes me think there was just something going on with the right side of my face, which resulted in the right side not expanding as much as the left side because the bone there was just more rigid or whatever. Of course, you can eliminate this risk using the dome procedure, in which the bone, the sutures here and here are cut, and this makes probably the resistance on both sides perfectly equal at like 0. So that basically eliminates resistance from your face, and then the MSE splits guaranteed, and it probably splits perfectly symmetrically. But when you do the dome procedure, you are giving up the opportunity to expand your cheekbones, because when you cut the sutures here, this area can no longer act as a handle to then expand the cheekbones. So, you know, probably not desirable, since one of the big benefits of the MSE is that it does expand the cheekbones. So maybe, you know, your situation won't be like mine and the unilateral expansion won't happen to you, but I've heard it happens to others as well, so that is a major risk. And then similarly, the expansion isn't just asymmetric in the left-right direction. When you expand one side more than the other, what happened with me is my left side is a little bit more forward than my right side now. Now this can be corrected orthodontically by moving teeth, but it does complicate the orthodontics, and it is something you should be aware of. Expand slowly and try to catch it in the act, and don't let the asymmetry become too much. All right, next up I want to get into some of the other risks associated with the MSE. I'm going to get into no split. So sometimes the MSE doesn't successfully split the suture. Why does this happen? Because your suture is strong. The sutures of adults are strong. Now, what percentage of cases does this happen in? Probably something like 25%, might be a little bit more, might be a little bit less. I don't know. But cortical puncturing will increase your chance of getting a successful split. Cortical puncturing means drilling holes up into the mid-palatal suture in order to weaken that suture so that it puts up less of a resistance to the MSE appliance. Now, when no split happens, but you're putting all that force into the appliance by turning it, another thing can happen, and that's called screw drag. Screw drag is when the MSE tads, instead of anchoring into the bone, they don't anchor well into the bone. They kind of, and then when you turn the appliance, they drag through the bone like when you stick a knife into a turkey pie and you drag the knife through. The knife isn't anchoring into the pie, it's just cutting right through the pie, right? So that's what the MSE tads, the MSE screws, can do if they're not engaged into good bone up there, good thick bone. And so that happens, okay? And if you have plastic arms attached to your MSE appliance, or I should say if you have plastic arms built into your MSE appliance, which some orthodontists do this, then those plastic arms, as the screw drags, the arms keep moving because the appliance continues to expand. It's just not splitting bone, but it continues to spread apart, and it pushes those plastic arms up into the skin of your maxilla, and that irritates the hell out of your skin and can cause an infection. I know a guy who had a pretty serious, not serious, but maybe it was serious. Yeah, I mean, he had a pretty serious complication with this where he got an infection and he had to remove his MSE appliance. So it happens. Now, if you don't have plastic arms, but you just have the metal arms on the appliance and the screws drag, then those metal arms transfer the force of the appliance being adjusted into the molars, because the MSE, when it's first installed, has arms that are attached to the molars to stabilize it. So if the screws drag, the force then goes into the arms and therefore into the molars and can flare the teeth. And that's why Dr. Ting recommends cutting those arms off of the MSE as soon as possible, so that you don't end up flaring the teeth if you get screw drag. And if you end up flaring the teeth, that just complicates your orthodontic situation more. Now you've got to torque those teeth back in using the MSE and power chain or elastics, and it's just more trouble that you want to avoid. Excuse me. Next, warping of the appliance. This is kind of minor. Okay, so Newton's first law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? The MSE is putting hella force into your maxilla, but your maxilla and your skull in general are putting hella force right back into the MSE. Now, the MSE is a tough little bastard. It is. It's made out of probably titanium. But it has its limits, and so when the skull puts all that force back into the MSE can warp, it can distort, and it's specifically the walls that are near the adjustment screw bend, or at least they did with me, and then I couldn't really adjust the MSE anymore because the wrench wouldn't fit because of the warping, and Dr. Nuaz had to use pliers to unbend those sidewalls. So that's pretty minor, but it did happen. And then the last two things that I want to talk about are pain and ugliness. So obviously pain is something I've talked a lot about. Pain is something I've talked a lot about before in prior videos about the MSE. Yeah, there's pain, okay? You're getting four 1 centimeter screws drilled up into your maxilla. And the maxilla is super sensitive. The maxilla is much more sensitive than the alveolar ridge. I've had TADs put into my alveolar ridge. Granted, they're smaller screws, but the ridge is much less sensitive than the maxilla. The maxilla must have more innervation or something, and when you screw into it with those 1 centimeter TADs, fuck man, yeah, it hurts. It throbs like a bitch for a couple days. I just had a woman who had an MSE installed the other day. She's in her second day of the MSE and messaged me that it was pretty painful. The other thing that's painful is the cortical puncturing. Yeah, drilling holes into your suture and fanning those holes out with the dental drill so that they're bigger hurts. We were just talking about how sensitive the maxilla is. It hurts. But it's not just the holes and the screws that make the MSE process painful. It's also the process of adjusting the MSE, because remember, what you're doing is you're turning that screw and you're generating a splitting force into your skull. So for anyone who's predisposed to headaches like I am, you are just going to trigger all of that process, right? You're just going to be putting in this foreign force into your entire head, neck, face region, and it's going to set you off. So have some medication and other pain relieving tools handy for that. What else do I want to say about pain? It hurts most in the nose. It feels like you got punched in the nose, because remember, a lot of the force is being applied right into here, into the floor of your nose, which is the same thing as the roof of your mouth. But you really do feel it everywhere, so just hang in there. It doesn't last forever. And then when the split does happen, the pain does relieve a little bit, but there is some pain throughout the entire expansion process. So that lasts about a few months. It's not terrible, but the terrible pain is in the beginning, the first week, but there is some residual pain throughout the entire expansion process. Last thing I want to talk about is ugliness to your teeth. The MSE makes a mess out of your teeth. Now, the MSE doesn't damage your teeth like other appliances like the AGA do, but it does take them for a ride and spread them out pretty good for a while until you orthodontically correct that. So what does MSE really do to the teeth? So imagine you have a piece of land, right? And you have trees on that land, you know, trees here and trees here. And then there's an earthquake, and the earthquake splits that land in half. Okay? The earthquake, which in our analogy is the MSE splitting, the suture, the earthquake doesn't actually damage the roots of those trees, but it does move the trees because the MSE moves the maxillary bone on which the teeth are sort of planted. And so the teeth go for a ride. The teeth don't get damaged, the roots of the teeth aren't affected, but the teeth go for a ride. And so until you move the teeth back, they're very wonky. In my case, I had multiple small diastemas, so that was very ugly and continues to be fairly ugly. But in most cases, I think, you end up getting one big diastema right in the middle, and that's not so bad. In fact, I think a diastema right down the middle can be, I don't want to say attractive, but it can be endearing. And you know, you have personalities like Michael Strahan who rock a diastema. One big diastema in the middle is not the end of the world. But if you end up like me, where you have multiple small diastemas and your teeth look like, you know, that clown game at the arcade where you shoot the clown's teeth out and you have these random gaps between teeth, yeah, that sucks. And I've been dealing with that pretty much for the past, you know, 10, 11 months. So yeah, you might be shy to smile for a while until you get that orthodontically corrected. So, all right, anyway, this video is a little longer than usual, but I hope you enjoyed that. Those are all the risks and complications that I know of that are associated with the MSE, and I'm sure there are more. I had a dentist message me the other day about one of the major risks being something about the cortical plate being damaged by the MSE. I don't know what that means, but maybe you should Google that and find out more for yourself. But that might be another potential risk too. So that's it for now. Hope you all enjoyed that and have a good day. Be easy. Peace.